There comes a moment in an empath's life when love starts to feel like pain, when loyalty feels like self-betrayal, and when staying connected begins to slowly destroy the very soul that was meant to care. And in that moment, the hardest decision isn't leaving strangers behind, it's walking away from family. This is not weakness. This is psychology. This is survival. An empath does not simply experience emotional pain. They live inside it. Imagine waking up every day already carrying the emotional weight of everyone you love. The disappointment in a parent's voice. The silent resentment at the dinner table. The unspoken comparisons. The guilt disguised as concern. An empath absorbs all of it like a sponge. While others can argue, shut down, and move on, the empath's nervous system keeps the memory alive. The body remembers what the mind tries to forgive. Over time, this constant emotional exposure becomes exhaustion, then anxiety, then a quiet kind of despair that no one sees. Many empaths grow up believing this is normal. They learn to read a room before they learn to read themselves. They sense tension before words are spoken. They adjust their behavior, tone, dreams, and even identity just to keep the emotional climate stable. And when that environment is family, where expectations run deep and boundaries are often ignored, the emotional cost multiplies. A sarcastic comment may sound small to others, but to an empath it echoes for days. A dismissive glance can feel like rejection of their entire being. There are countless real-life stories of empaths who tried everything before walking away. They communicated calmly, they explained their feelings, they forgave again and again, yet the emotional wounds kept reopening. One empath might describe sitting in their car after a family gathering, hands shaking, heart racing, wondering why love feels like suffocation. Another might speak about developing chronic stress, insomnia, or emotional numbness, not because they were weak, but because their system was overloaded. And here is the truth most people never understand. When emotional pain reaches a certain threshold, the psyche demands protection. This is not drama. This is biology. The brain recognizes repeated emotional harm as a threat. Distance becomes the only way the empath can breathe again. Cutting off contact is not about rejecting family. It is about refusing to continue bleeding for the comfort of others. When an empath finally chooses space, something powerful happens. The noise quiets, the body relaxes. For the first time, they can hear their own thoughts without interference. And in that silence, they begin to heal. They rediscover who they are when they are not carrying everyone else's pain. That decision, painful, misunderstood, and lonely, is not a failure of love. It is the highest form of self-respect an empath can claim. Most empaths don't become overgivers by choice. They are trained that way. Long before they understood the language of emotions, they learned a silent rule: your worth comes from what you provide, not who you are. In many families, the empath was the child who sensed distress before anyone spoke, the one who softened arguments, the one who absorbed tension so others could function. They became the emotional glue holding everything together, often praised for being mature, understanding, or selfless. Without realizing they were being rewarded for self-erasure. Picture a child who learns early that expressing their own pain creates more chaos. So they stop asking, they stop needing, they stop taking up space. Instead, they listen, they fix, they carry. Over time, this role hardens into identity. As adults, these empaths feel responsible for everyone's emotional state. A parent's disappointment feels like personal failure. A sibling's anger feels like something they must heal. They overextend, overexplain, and overforgive, not because they are weak, but because their nervous system was wired to equate love with sacrifice. Real-life stories echo this pattern again and again. An empath stays in family conversations that drain them, telling themselves, "They don't mean it," or "It's my job to understand." They show up emotionally even when they are breaking internally. They become the family therapist without consent, the peacekeeper without protection. And the most dangerous part, their overgiving is rarely questioned. It is expected. When an empath finally says no, the system reacts. Guilt is triggered. Labels appear. Suddenly, the same empathy that once made them indispensable becomes inconvenient. Cutting off contact, then, is not rebellion. It is deconditioning. It is the moment an empath realizes that love does not require self-destruction, that being loyal to others while abandoning yourself is not virtue, it is trauma. Walking away is the first time the empath chooses to meet their own needs with the same devotion they once gave everyone else. And in that choice, something revolutionary happens. The empath begins to reclaim their energy. Their voice strengthens. Their boundaries solidify. They learn that healthy relationships do not demand constant sacrifice. This is not selfishness. This is emotional intelligence awakening. This is the empath unlearning survival and finally stepping into self-respect, not to punish the family, but to finally fully choose themselves. For an empath, guilt is not a passing feeling. It is a constant companion. It whispers in quiet moments and shouts in the middle of the night, "How could you do this? They're still your family." What kind of person walks away? Empaths carry guilt more deeply because they can vividly imagine how others might feel without them. They don't just think about the consequences, they emotionally experience them. And for a long time, that guilt is enough to keep them trapped. Many empaths stay far longer than they should, not because they don't see the damage, but because they believe endurance is love. They convince themselves that suffering silently is noble, that understanding harmful behavior makes it acceptable. There are real people who spend years living with anxiety, panic attacks, or emotional numbness, all while telling themselves, this is just how family is. They absorb blame that was never theirs. They apologize for pain they didn't cause. Carry emotional burdens that were never meant to be theirs to hold. But there comes a moment, often after emotional burnout, illness, or a breaking point, when the body and mind draw a hard line. The empath realizes that staying connected is costing them their peace, their health, and sometimes their identity. This is where psychology shifts. Self-preservation awakens. The nervous system, exhausted from constant threat, begins to prioritize survival over approval. And in that moment, guilt loses its grip. This doesn't mean guilt disappears. It means it no longer controls the decision. The empath starts to understand a powerful truth. You can love people and still choose distance. You can honor family ties without sacrificing your mental health on the altar of obligation. Real-life examples show this clearly. Empaths who finally stepped away often describe feeling terrified at first, shaking as they set boundaries, questioning themselves constantly. But then something unexpected happens. Their sleep improves, their thoughts slow down, their chest feels lighter, the chaos quiets. That relief is not selfishness. It is evidence of healing. It proves the cost was real. It confirms that the decision was necessary. Over time, the empath reframes guilt into clarity. They realize that staying would have meant continuing a cycle of harm, while leaving creates the possibility of growth for everyone involved. When self-preservation becomes stronger than guilt, the empath doesn't become heartless, they become whole. They stop surviving for others and start living for themselves. And that choice, though painful, is one of the bravest acts of emotional intelligence a person can make. Empaths are not impulsive when it comes to walking away. They are patient to a fault. Long before contact is cut, there are countless silent negotiations happening inside their mind. Maybe I didn't explain myself clearly. Maybe if I stay calmer. Maybe if I love harder, give more, forgive again. This is the internal dialogue of someone who desperately wants harmony, not separation. Empaths don't abandon relationships at the first sign of pain. They endure, adapt, and minimize themselves in the hope that things will finally change. Boundaries for an empath are not walls. They are quiet requests. Please don't speak to me like that. That hurts me. I need space. These words are often spoken gently, repeatedly, and with empathy for the other person's emotions. But in unhealthy family systems, those boundaries are ignored, mocked, or punished. The empath is told they are too sensitive, dramatic, or ungrateful. Over time, the message becomes clear. Their feelings are acceptable only when they are convenient. Real-life experiences reflect this pattern over and over. An empath asks for respect and is met with guilt-tripping. They try to disengage from toxic conversations and are accused of being cold. They ask for emotional safety and are met with denial or rage. Each violation chips away at trust. Each dismissal teaches the empath that their boundaries are not seen as real. And when boundaries are repeatedly crossed, the psyche records it as danger. This is where psychology becomes undeniable. When a person's emotional limits are ignored consistently, the brain stops offering partial solutions. Distance becomes the final boundary. Cutting off contact is not a sudden decision. It is the last chapter of a long, painful story. It is what happens when communication fails, empathy is one-sided, and respect is never reciprocated. Many empaths can recount the exact moment they knew there was nothing left to try. Not a dramatic explosion, but a quiet realization. A calm sadness, a deep fatigue. They stop explaining, they stop hoping, they stop fighting. And that stillness is not indifference, it is clarity. When an empath finally chooses distance, it is not an act of anger, but of acceptance. Acceptance that love without respect is not safe. Acceptance that boundaries without consequences are meaningless. Acceptance that sometimes the only way to honor yourself is to remove yourself. This choice reshapes the empath. They learn that walking away does not mean they failed, it means they listened to themselves. And in doing so, they reclaim something priceless, their dignity, their emotional safety, and their right to exist without constant violation. For an empath, silence is often mistaken as cruelty, but in truth, it is medicine. When an empath creates emotional distance, it is not to punish, control, or teach a lesson. It is to survive. After years of emotional noise, criticism disguised as concern, manipulation masked as love, conversations that leave the soul shaking, the empath's nervous system reaches its limit. At that point, engagement itself becomes harmful. Distance is not abandonment, it is regulation. Many empaths describe the moment they step back as both terrifying and relieving. Terrifying because they have been conditioned to believe that space equals rejection. Relieving because, for the first time, their mind is not under attack. Imagine someone who has lived in emotional chaos for decades suddenly stepping into quiet. No constant vigilance, no walking on eggshells, no rehearsing conversations in their head, just stillness. That stillness allows the body to exhale. Real-life stories reveal this truth clearly. An empath stops answering calls and feels guilt at first, a deep, aching guilt. But then something unexpected happens. Their chest loosens, their anxiety eases, their thoughts slow down. They start sleeping through the night. This is not coincidence. Psychology shows that chronic emotional stress keeps the nervous system in fight or flight mode. Distance allows it to reset. Healing begins not through confrontation, but through calm. Empaths do not use distance as a weapon because they understand pain too well to deliberately inflict it. Instead, distance becomes a container, a safe space where they can rebuild their identity without constant emotional intrusion. It allows them to separate who they are from who they were forced to be. They begin to ask themselves questions they never had space to ask before. What do I feel? What do I need? What do I want my life to look like? This period of distance is often where the deepest transformation occurs. The empath learns that peace does not require explanation, that healing does not need permission, that they are allowed to choose environments that support, not drain, their emotional health. And most importantly, they realize that relationships rooted in love will survive boundaries, but relationships rooted in control will not. Distance is not the end of connection. It is a diagnostic tool. It reveals who respects your absence and who resents your autonomy. It shows the empath which bonds were mutual and which were built on self-sacrifice. And with that clarity, the empath grows stronger, calmer, and more grounded. So when an empath steps back, understand this, they are not closing their heart. They are protecting it. They are giving themselves the space to heal so that one day they can love again, not from wounds, but from wholeness. When an empath finally cuts off contact, the world assumes something has been lost. But inside the empath, something long buried begins to rise. This moment, painful, lonely, misunderstood, often marks the beginning of self-actualization. For the first time, the empath is no longer reacting, managing, fixing, or absorbing. They are choosing, and single shift changes everything. For years, the empath's identity was shaped around others' needs: who to be, how to speak, when to stay quiet, what to tolerate. Their inner compass was outsourced. But once distance is created, that fog begins to clear. The empath starts to hear their own voice without interruption. They notice how much lighter their body feels, how decisions no longer come with dread, how confidence quietly replaces anxiety. This is not arrogance. It is alignment. Real-life transformations tell this story powerfully. Empaths who once doubted every choice begin to trust themselves. Those who lived in constant emotional chaos start building lives rooted in intention. They pursue goals they once felt guilty for wanting. They choose relationships where empathy flows both ways. They stop shrinking to fit spaces that were never designed to hold them. This is not rebellion, it is evolution. Psychologically, this is the shift from survival mode to growth mode. When an empath is no longer under constant emotional threat, higher levels of emotional intelligence activate. Clarity sharpens, discernment deepens. They no longer confuse intensity with intimacy or guilt with love. They recognize that real connection does not require suffering. This awareness is transformative and irreversible. What outsiders often fail to see is that cutting off family is not the end of compassion. It is the refinement of it. The empath learns to love without self-erasure, to care without collapse, to offer empathy without abandoning themselves. This is emotional maturity at its highest level, the ability to hold love and boundaries at the same time. Yes, the journey is lonely at first. There are moments of doubt, moments of grief, moments where the old conditioning tries to pull them back. But something inside is changed. The empath has tasted peace. And once you experience peace, chaos loses its appeal. This is the moment the empath steps into their power. Not loud power, not dominating power, but grounded, calm, unshakable power. The kind that comes from knowing who you are and refusing to betray that truth again. What was once labeled as walking away becomes something else entirely, coming home to yourself. And from that place of wholeness, the empath doesn't just survive, they lead, they heal, and they live with a depth and clarity few ever reach.